Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And can I start, first of all, by saying thank you, Minister, for coming along and for inviting me. I am absolutely delighted to be here and with distinguished councillors, guests, friends. Very happy to be here in Ireland, very happy to talk here about an issue that matters to me, to my heart, and to you. And the reason why I'm talking to you today about a subject which is saying, what should I care about wetlands, is because in so many places people don't. Now, we do have a slight complication, as King has indicated, by having a convention that was signed in a country and a place which is not necessarily the most salubrious. It has a reprocessing uranium plant in it, and it certainly is a place where the Shah held a number of events like the one that was hosting the founding and the signing of the convention. But that is nothing compared to the negativity that many people have towards the word wetlands. In many countries it's untranslatable, and it certainly isn't a positive word. So wetlands mean what? For many people there is no understanding that they include all the coastlines that you've ever walked on, all the beaches, all the coral, all the mangroves, all the rivers and the streams, and the man-made fish ponds and all the rice that provides enough food for 20% of the world. We are responsible in the convention for somewhere between 12 and 15 million square kilometres of the land, about 12–15%. And they contain some of the most important areas, not just for livelihoods, but for carbon. The peatlands, of which you are a proud possessor of a significant portion, not just of beautiful peatlands, but of enormously important carbon. All the peatlands of the world are contained in 3% of the land's surface. And that small stretch of land contains twice as much carbon as all our forests. That's it, twice as much carbon as all the forests. So it's a significant and a very important aspect of balancing a carbon budget is how do we look after our peatlands. And just now, on the 27th of April, the Nordic Council of Environment Ministers made a strong statement, supporting not just peatlands, their value for the people of the North, and their value to the world in terms of carbon, but also to say that these are vital resources that we must maintain and ensure stay in the ground as far as is possible, because they contain so much carbon and we cannot afford to lose so much into the air. And when we look at water, when we look at wetlands, people do not appreciate that the wetlands are where your water comes from. 73% of Americans, when questioned where their water came from, said a tap or a bottle. Well, it's fairly true, yeah. But the water comes from wetlands, everything. Everything that doesn't fall from the sky as rain and penetrate and stay there and evaporate, all of that is coming into wetlands and comes to you. And you use it for a number of purposes. We need water. And although Ireland has no prospect and no real need for conserving water, a lot of problems are going to come in the next 40 years. A very serious shortfall in fresh water, particularly in arid areas, will increase insecurity, will increase risk to food and risk to water. And 1.1 billion people still don't have enough water to wash and cook and clean. And it's going to get worse. And that is partly a result of change, of societal change, and partly a problem of removal of wetlands. So what have the wetlands ever done for you? Well, they do provide a lot of water. They clean your water. They provide for transport, significant values. The food, the fishing, the hunting, the leisure, the pleasure that we have. The flood control, which is of incredible importance, perhaps not for the absolutely enormous 1,000-year floods, but certainly on every day it helps considerably that your wetlands act as sponges against both the drought and the flooding. They protect you, and they allow you to be able to exist in your houses without risk. We have coastal protection. The value of even a small piece of coastland with the dunes is enormous. But if you expand that out to mangroves, 1 kilometre of mangrove is enough to stop a tsunami in its tracks, to prevent problems of hurricanes, and to be able to give enormous livelihoods for people. But once you cut it out, your coasts and your people become very vulnerable. And those are the aspects that wetlands also do. They act as carbon sinks, they act to protect the people, and they have this wonderful richness, this beauty that we all appreciate in biodiversity. And they allow us to have sustainable livelihoods in so many different ways. The mission of Ramsar is a clear and a straightforward one. It says conservation and wise use of all wetlands through local and national actions and international cooperation as a contribution towards achieving sustainable development. True when written, true now. It's all about wise use. And what does that mean? It was visionary to use the words in a convention in 1971, wise use. We translate that to be sustainable development. We translate that to be a decision by a sovereign people to decide what they want to do with each and every one of their wetlands. And our job is to support and help and inform the taking of those decisions with the best possible information and the best possible knowledge to be able to assist in that decision taking. In this year, we are producing a new strategic plan for the next 6 years, and it is also happening that the Sustainable Development Goals, which are a new and a more egalitarian way to look at the Millennium Development Goals, are being developed. And they cover water and wetlands to a very large extent. Out of the 17, 7 goals and 27 of the targets cover the aspects that we talk about within the Ramsar Convention. And it's our job to make sure that parties ensure that both the wetland value, the water services that we provide are going to be there and continue to be there as we go forward into the final negotiations. And our strategic plan has to reflect that. Because if it doesn't, then the relevance for you and other countries is significantly reduced. Now, I didn't realise when I started a year and a half how bad the situation was. In the last 200 years, the records say we've lost 87% of all wetlands. And in the last 100 years, 64%. That's pretty bad. But even when you look at the wetland species, the plants, the animals, over the last 40 years, the best data from WWF on Living Planet says 76%. Worse than any other ecosystem in the world. Average 40 to 50%. Wetlands, 76%. And we use more water than ever before. We're more demanding on the planet. And as the Minister says, we do not necessarily understand wetlands. We think of them as wasteland, to be drained, to be converted. And there's far too little knowledge about the benefits and the services that they can and they do provide. And it's got worse. I don't know if you remember in the 80s, there was a very big concern about the loss of forests. Brazilian rainforests, Indonesian rainforests, jungles. The rate of loss at that time was 0.3%. And that's the worst loss of rainforest there's been for several 100,000 years. In the last 40 years, we have lost 1% of wetlands every year, and it is continuing. So, naturally enough, you are very rich in wetlands here in Ireland, but there are other places where it is significantly a problem, and going to be a problem, and going to lead to water shortages because we don't have those abilities, because we've cut out, we've reduced, we've degraded, or we've converted wetlands. And the actual loss of wetlands is considered by estimates of those who are economists over the last 18 years to be worth about $2.7 trillion per year. So those are big figures, rather frightening. So we need to look about a future. We need to look about hope. We need to look about plans and to actually make a difference. And that's what the new strategic plan focuses on. Prevent, stop, and reverse the loss and degradation of wetlands. because that's what we need to do in so many countries, in so many different ways. Each country has a different problem, a different challenge, and there are different solutions. And the goals are all about looking at why we're losing the wetlands, why they're being degraded, managing the wonderful Ramsar sites, which are like jewels in your crown, and to look at how we achieve that wise use of wetlands through partnerships, because we can't do it alone. And looking at how we inform, how we change people's minds, change their opinions, reach to their hearts, and get them to understand they need wetlands. Wetlands don't need them. And so, if there is any understanding, it is that we are a small convention working on a big issue, and we have to work with and through others. And we need to look about other people's goals and ambitions. What is happening in the Sustainable Development Goals? Where are we involved? Well, we contribute 1 or 2 indicators to that fight. We are contributing to the targets for biodiversity, the Aichi targets, and we hope that our countries within Europe, of which I am a member, are moving towards the 15% restoration target. But we note that the European Commission still allows, by law, the conversion of wetlands into agricultural fields without problems. And we find this a debate that is worth having with the Commission and with the countries to find out, is that wise use of wetlands? So, in any convention, the most important part of the convention is those that are participating members, like Ireland, one of the 169 countries that now are parties. Kuwait has just joined. And it gives Ramsar the possibility of having a variety of voices and the possibility of leveraging an enormous amount of influence. Each country with its own unique questions and needs, and each country needing to look at that trade-off between development and environment, that trade-off, what does wise use mean for them in this county, in that wetland, what are we going to do? And we note that the national reports that each country is due to produce now for the Conference of Parties, which will happen in 2 weeks' time in Uruguay, each country is due to produce a national report on what's happened to their wetlands. Ireland is not a star in this. And this is something that we hope that we will be able to see, that the reports do come from Ireland and there is full representation. Because this is where there is an understanding gained about a relative position in the world about where our wetlands are. And we already have evidence from a recent study that says that countries are reporting and working with the Ramsar Convention better than with any other convention because of the close relationships between the Secretariat and the countries, and this has been particularly clear in Africa. We get 90% or higher rates of national reports there. And so that's very encouraging because it shows the commitment and the interest of countries to wetlands. But of course, not everybody understands why wetlands are important, and they are converted every day. Increased amounts of grazing because people eat more meat than ever. Increased amounts of agriculture because we have a larger population. 45% more food. How much more wetland can we lose before it will have a negative cycle, a negative feedback for the future? And how can we make sure that we look at all of these drivers? The development of infrastructure, necessary. The diversion of water, but for how long will it work? Should we really be putting canals in, or should we be using wetlands in combination with hardlands to be able to manage the problems? And obviously, water pollution, contamination, the waste, the fertilizers, this has been going on for a long time. 80% of all of the water that we use goes straight into the wetlands and the rivers. We've been doing that for a long time. The wetlands manage, the fisheries suffer sometimes, but this is something that we can't manage at the moment. We can't manage to improve it. But there are increasing pressures on climate, from climate change on us, and we have to be aware it's a problem. Many parts of the world, it's getting wetter. But unfortunately, the places where we don't want it to be getting drier are getting drier. And those are countries where there are significant sources of insecurity. And we have to be aware that wetlands and good agriculture need to happen together. So we have to work with agriculture to increase its efficiency. We need to work about how to build natural infrastructure into hard-nosed flood protection schemes, looking at how to produce the water balance across sectors, how to ensure that water governance is done in an efficient manner and that wetlands are considered within the whole realm of issues when we have decisions to be made on how to get water to people at an economic price and how to guarantee water for the future. Because in Davos, in the World Economic Forum, it is water that is seen as the single most important risk for businesses. It's been going up in the last 3 years, and now water hits number one, because businesses are relocating. They may relocate to Ireland, because there are many countries where water is becoming so risky for countries that they can't, for companies, that they can't think that in 20 years' time they can survive. So they're moving. They're spending 84 billion in the last 10 years just on water protection devices. We have problems and we have solutions in wetlands, and we need to consider how to do that. In the world, we have already some beautiful Ramsar sites. Over 2,100 sites, and an area larger than the size of Mexico is covered by Ramsar sites, 200 million hectares. And we have great relationships between the parties, between the civil society, between government and bank and private sector, that allows us to be able to achieve enormous results. And we have great papers and advice and technical guidance produced with your help. And we hope that there will be a greater understanding of the economic value as well as the non-economic value of wetlands as we do more studies like the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity, as we delve deeper into the value of the carbon or the value of the disaster risk reduction aspects of wetlands. And we hope that when we are working with 169 parties, that we can find and work with you to implement solutions that work for you. Because it cannot be possible that the same solution will work in all countries. Unfortunately, not all countries are wonderful at reporting back on the state of their Ramsar sites. 70% of outdated information. In the case of Ireland, 45 sites, all of them need updating. All of them need maps, GPS maps, and all of them are more than 6 years out of date. And these are issues that we see that there are already 144 Ramsar sites which are known and understood by the countries to have problems, including a number here in Ireland. And out of the total of over 2,100 sites, that's not a small number. But we've done a study along with World Heritage looking at all of their sites that are natural and sites that are also Ramsar sites, and the average is somewhere between 30 to 40% of all the World Heritage sites, which receive far more money than the Ramsar sites, are at serious risk. And by estimation and by ratio, we consider that that means that there are at least 750 Ramsar sites that are under severe risk. And that, in the case of Ireland, would mean somewhere in the region of 10 to 15 of the Ramsar sites are at serious risk. We're not getting the information from the public, and we're not necessarily getting the information from the government. And if we don't know what is happening, and we don't see, because we sit in an office back in Switzerland, it's difficult for us to give the true picture of the site of those, of the state of those Ramsar sites. And we need that feedback from you to be able to explain and understand in order to tackle those issues. And because we see that there is a degradation of sites, because we see that globally we're losing 1% of wetlands per year. We have worked to produce a concept, to develop an idea on a global partnership for wetland restoration. And this is to be launched within the new concept of the strategy in Punta del Este in Uruguay in a couple of weeks. And we will talk there about how there is already a great body and a momentum to try and restore degraded land under the Bonn Declaration. And there is an idea that we can work with other organizations to be able to ensure that we restore wetlands. At the moment, China, because of the severe risks of flooding on the Yangtze, has stopped investing in hard infrastructure. They'd spent 20 billion on hard infrastructure. They're now taking out of farmland 1,700 square kilometers of farmland and putting it back to wetland, just to be able to have that sponge for the flooding, because the flooding is so dangerous and so damaging to the people, to the landscape and to the economy. So they are investing in actually allowing areas to go back to wetland. And that's the sort of restoration that needs to be done. Because when you've lost 64% of all your wetlands in the last 100 years, you are at severe risk of flood and drought and problems of water if you do not invest in wetlands. And that's what we're proposing. We believe that there is an enormous amount of knowledge of how this can be done effectively in this country and in many others. And we see that also there is a convention, the Convention on Wetlands, which allows us to bring together and catalyse that sort of energy and that sort of idea for the future. Because this was never happening in forests, and we have stopped the trend of loss. We are now down to 0.1 to 0.2% loss per year. We've stopped the problem on forests. We have to do the same in wetlands. And we will work with partners like other conventions, the one that works on land degradation, UNCCD. We will look at maybe a target of 100 million hectares restored by 2020. And we will work with the SDGs, with the European Commission and with you to look at how those Aichi targets can be achieved better by carrying out the restoration. It's ambition. It's doable, and we have experience and we have results both from the private sector and from the public sector on how this can be done. And we see that there is an enormous body of work carried on and that there is more that can be done. And when we also look at the other aspects of wetlands, in closing I'd like to say that I particularly appreciate the way that Ireland is looking at heritage on natural and built heritage, because that responds so much better to our ideas about landscape and culture. For us, the idea that wetlands are held together by so many strands is the normal one. That culture and spirit, spirituality and beauty, the power of the wetlands to inspire and to be able to protect you, to provide food, to transport you, to give you life, to give you leisure, and to be able to help protect you against danger. All of these are aspects that we see. And so we're very pleased that we now have a new project that looks at culture in aspects of architecture, storytelling, food, not just all of the things that we are talking about here, but to understand better how people are using their wetlands. What are their links to the wetlands? How do they feel about them? What is their historical relationship with the wetlands? And how can we ensure that they help explain, help breathe life into wetlands and help breathe life into their children and their grandchildren about the importance of wetlands for them? Because what is absolutely clear is that if you don't have wetlands, you don't have sustainable development. Wetlands are the source of sustainable development. Thank you very much indeed. Good day.